I'm here with Don Davis, and we're going to be talking about the very first album, or it was an EP, I think you said, recorded by Material.
Hmm.
But before they were Material, they were Zoo Band. So we're going to be talking about both those entities and how those things happened and what led Don to be working with these people. So Don, why don't you give us a little of your background first and how you ended up hooking up with these guys? We're talking about 1978, I believe, right?
78, 79. Full disclosure here, I mean, I had very little to do with this record, except I was on the road with New York Gong, which comprised of three bands when we were on tour. And one of the bands was Zoo Band. And then part of Zoo Band, like Laswell, was playing in New York Gong. And then we also had Mother Gong, which was Jilly Smith or Jilly Smythe.
But you were all on the same bus?
Yeah, yeah, and not only that, Rick, there was supposed to be more. I mean, the original plan was there was going to be like a whole like four or five bands, and Yoshko Sefer from Magma was supposed to be part of it. This violinist named Horvath Laus, who I never met, from Hungary, I think he was supposed to be part of it.
Well, this was
There was
all
all.
organized by Giorgio Gomelsky, who's the guy that I'm writing about at the moment, and I'm working on a book called The Gomelsky Recordings. But before we get more into who Giorgio is and who the Zoo Band are and all that,
Mhm.
why don't you tell me a little bit about what was going on in the New York City music scene around 1978? Because it was in 1978 that Gomelsky and another famous European producer, Brian Eno, come to New York City basically to check out the music scene. I think Eno was there to record with the Talking Heads, but all these people start interacting, and it's kind of an explosion of music after that. So what was going on in New York City in the music scene as far as you saw?
Okay, well, I didn't move to New York City until around 1980, but I was in Woodstock, New York, which is about 100 miles north of New York, and I moved there in 75. I visited there in 74 and then moved to Woodstock in 75 to go to the Creative Music Studio. It
Can you tell us
was,
a little bit about the Creative Music Studio? Because not everybody is familiar with it.
yeah, at Creative Music Studio. It was also called the Creative Music Foundation. It was started by Carl Berger. Theoretically, Ornette Coleman was involved, and even John Cage, I think, had something to do with it. It started in New York City at the New School of Social Research,
Ah,
and then Carl brought it up to Woodstock, New York. And I was at Berklee College of Music studying music there in a degree program. And most of the stuff I was doing really was sort of extracurricular, like outside of the school. I was into more modern, uh, I don't know if it's called modern, more the avant-garde stuff like Albert Eiler and Ornette Coleman and Art Ensemble Chicago. And I was really into that stuff, and I was playing with people doing that. And then one day I heard Dave Holland's first album that came out, Conference of the Birds, and I heard a solo on there by Anthony Braxton. And when I heard that solo, it was so perfectly twisted and wonderful that I just said, I heard he was at the Creative Music Studio where he lived in Woodstock, and I just said, that's it. I got to go there. I got to meet this guy. So I was doing a certain kind of music. It led me to want to go to the Creative Music Studio, and that's what got me to Woodstock.
I guess we should let everybody know that you are a sax player, and um, so I suppose you you really wanted to play with. These are icons of the sax that you were playing with.
Yeah, not just that, but the whole, I started looking into it, and my friend Larry Lerner, who was a drummer, he told me about it, and we drove there together in 1974 to go visit Carl, um, and when I went there, the town of Woodstock and the whole vibe, the whole feeling of the studio, it was like so perfect for me at the time. And I was living in Boston, and I was getting a little I don't know, the city life, and I guess I was ready for a change. I mean, I went to the Creative Music Studio with full intention of going back and finishing up my degree, but that never happened. Once you're in Woodstock, you start feeling the pull for New York City.
Sure. And so so tell me a little bit about that pull and the mixing of the crowd and what was the music scene, like then?
Yeah, it was wonderful. Part of the great thing about Carl and Creative Music Studio, the people he was bringing up there, you might call them teachers, but they call them guiding artists. Most of them were coming from New York. Eventually, they were coming from, all over the world. There's a big world music program started happening. But at first, I was meeting people like Anthony Braxton and Leo Smith and Dave Holland, Jack DeJohnette, Stu Martin, great drummer Stu Martin. I met a whole bunch of people.
Stu ends up on the Zoo Band tour, right?
Yes, that. We'll get to that because that was my connection. And then the students that were coming to the Creative Music Studio were just wonderful. They were from all over the world, actually. A lot of Europeans, Germans. That's where I met George Cartwright, for instance, and that's where I met Mark Kramer, who became instrumental in putting the New York Gong band together. As far as I can tell.
That's the guy from Bongwater, right?
Yeah, and exactly. And his record label. He had a studio in New York called Noise New York.
Uh-huh.
And then he had a record label called Shimmy Disc, which he didn't have it then, but eventually he became Shimmy Disc.
Yeah, I've got a lot of Shimmy Disc in my collection.
Yeah, so when I was at the Creative Music Studio, eventually I was in a band called the Swollen Monkeys, but it started out as Mind Control Salsa Orchestra, and Mark Kramer was part of that. So that's how I was already starting to play with Kramer. But a lot of that didn't happen until after the tour with Gong. So somehow, I don't know, I don't remember Mark Kramer asking me to go down there. I don't remember that at all, but somehow I heard about they were looking for a sax player. They might have even asked George around then, but he didn't do it at the time. And my friend Marilyn Crispell, who I was playing with at that time, piano player, even she had gotten wind of Bill Laswell. And she says, oh yeah, like we were talking about it. That sounds like a good thing. He's like really a happening bass player. And then when I thought, well, him playing with Stu Martin, that's got to be killer. Because
so you would go down to New York to see these people, and where would you go?
Well, before that, I would go down to do some performances with Carl or different people. During the mid '70s, we would go down to do a concert, for instance. Or maybe I'd go down to see a show, but I was living in Woodstock. There was a lot of people going back and forth all the time.
Uh-huh.
There was always a shuttle, with friends going back and forth, whoever had a car. That was a big deal back there, who had a car.
Right.
I mean, you could take the bus and all that, but it was complicated.
So what were your preferred venues to go to?
Well, there was the loft scene was happening back then. I remember going to Studio Rivby, which was Sam Rivers' studio. I did my first loft concert with Garrett List, who was a guiding artist at the Creative Music Studio. He had the A1 art band, and he was a trombone player, and he passed away a couple of years ago. Yeah, so where else? I mean, go to CBGB's or go to I really don't remember all the places, different venues, like if Ornette Coleman was playing somewhere. Yeah. But I do remember the loft scene, maybe Roulette might have been one of the places. I remember going down.
Gomelski had his own loft thing going on. I don't know what he was calling it at the time. It had different names. Did you ever go over there?
Yes, I played there with Carl. So there was a connection with Carl Berger and Giorgio, and I'm not sure if that happened. I can't remember if that was before the New York Gong events or after. But I was just thinking about this the other day. I saw that movie, that documentary. Well, not a documentary. It's actually a movie they made about CBGBs.
Oh yeah,
I think it's on Amazon or something. And Hilly Crystal, who ran that place. I started thinking, man, there's some similarities between Hillary and Giorgio. One was they both walked around with big dogs.
Oh, Uh-huh.
right? And dog shit everywhere. And two, um, Hillary, I mean, Hilly was open to like almost anything. Like you didn't have to be well known. You could just show up there. If you liked you could play there.
Uh-huh.
Well, Giorgio was a different level and a different scene, and it was a later period. But I felt the same thing. There were a lot of bands, you could play there. You know, if you liked you or somehow you could get in there. So I'm trying to remember what bands I saw there, but that's where we started rehearsing.
Well, Laswell was living there in Giorgio's loft for a while. Was he living there when you were getting ready to hook up with them?
Yeah, I wasn't aware of that, but it wouldn't surprise me.
Yeah.
I mean, at that time, it was in Chelsea, and at that time, from my perspective, that wasn't like the heart of the city. That was sort of still like, oh man, we're going over to Chelsea, But now it's like, it's the center of the universe down there. So through the CMS or Crave Music Studio, we were going back and forth to New York, and somehow through Kramer and Stu Martin, I got called in to play with the band, and I started going down there for a couple of rehearsals, not many.
Yeah.
I don't even remember. And it was also for Mother Gong, and Mother Gong actually had more, slightly different music.
Right.
And for me, it was 1979. I mean, I was like 24 or something like that, and I had never gone on tour. I'd been in bands. I was playing in bands, but I hadn't never heard of Gong or David Allen or Giorgio, or I never heard of any of these people. And it was just a funny thing because they did have sort of a cult following.
Yeah. Well, that's the thing about Giorgio. People in the U.S. didn't really know the guy. I mean, he was well known in the London scene for, managing and producing the Yardbirds, of course.
Yeah.
And Soft Machine and Magma and all these other things before he falls in love with New York City in '78 and ends up moving.
Mm-hmm.
So, Giorgio's in New York in '78, Brian Eno's in New York in '78, but Giorgio, he's not, by the end of '78, towards the end of '78, he's already organizing stuff. And he has this big festival called the Zoo Manifestival that happened in October of '78. Can you tell me a little bit about that?
Well, I'll be very honest with you. I knew nothing about it. And some people think since I played with New York Gong, I was part of that, but I wasn't. In fact, George Bishop played saxophone on that. And George Bishop, by coincidence, I didn't know him, but I ended up eventually playing with the Microscopic Septet. And George Bishop was initially part of that band along with John Zorn. And I took John Zorn's place when he left to do other things. So I didn't know any of those people. Maybe Gary Window might have been on that. I don't think I heard much about that until afterwards. I guess it was. I don't remember really discussing it too much. All I know is when the thing started, when they wanted to go on the road and do the aftermath of all that,
right?
Putting a band together and taking creating Zoo Band and merging it with New York Gong. Honestly, I don't really know how all that stuff happened. I mean, I just kind of got called in to play sax, and I was just going along with the ride.
Well, it seems like the focal person for a lot of this was David Allen from Gong.
Yeah.
And he and Gomelski had a close relationship since Gomelski had been managing Gong for quite a while over in France.
Yeah.
Now they're in New York and they're forming New York Gong. And and this Manifestival also involves David Allen, right?
Yeah. I mean, the concept of Manifestival was multiple bands, and then he wanted to do that concept across the country.
Right.
So that was the idea, was to, I guess the first one, he did it in Europe, but then he did this one in New York City. I forget where the venue was. But then a similar one happened at CBGB's, and that was the start of the tour as far as my participation. It was the first time I remember coming out of a gig and it was daylight. And I also tell people my ears have been ringing ever since that night. So loud.
So it looks like that Zoo Band tour of North America started around April of '79. So that's about 6 months after the Manifestival.
That
So
sounds right.
imagine quite a bit happened in that 6 months. But before you hit the road in April, um, uh, what was your relationship like with the band? And like, were you guys doing rehearsals? And where would that happen?
Well, I know they were rehearsing. I wasn't always part of it. I only remember one or two rehearsals that I was doing. I mean, it happened pretty fast. It was pretty haphazard. We played that CBGB's gig, and I think I even had some sheet music. I was reading stuff, and there were other sax players. There was Gary Window was on that, and there was another great saxophone player, Richard. Sorry, I can't remember his name. Great player, Richard. I'll think of it later. So we had like three
So
saxes.
is this David Allen's compositions that you're doing, or other people's?
No, it was all David Allen stuff, or the Mother Gong stuff, which was arranged by a lot of that was arranged by Harry Williamson,
Mm-hmm.
and he was working with Jilly. So it was this whole combination. So the concept was I was going to play in both bands, New York Gong and then Mother Gong, and so was Bill Laswell. He was playing in both of them, and there was crossovers between Zoo Band, Gong, and Mother Gong, and Bill played in all three of them.
Uh-huh. Yeah. And what was it like interacting with David Allen? He has quite a reputation.
Yeah, he was kind of a goofy guy. I mean, the funny thing is I was up in Woodstock, and I was really coming out of this hippie kind of scene. You know, I'd been living in a yurt and living in a teepee, and I had long hair. and there's a funny picture I sent you of us on the bus, and I'm wearing all white, and I have, long hair.
Oh, yeah,
Everybody else.
I got to pull up that picture. Yeah, that all white outfit really stood out there.
I know. I was thinking, what the hell am I doing in this band? I felt like, but they, if you look at Gong itself, it had a really psychedelic, hippy dippy kind of following. But when David came to New York, I mean, he was wearing leathers, and he was trying to like fit into some other kind of, I don't know if he was trying to fit into some kind of punk scene. And of course, Zoo Band, those guys were all from like Brooklyn and Queens, I think, and they looked like they were from the neighborhood. They were cool. They were kind of punky looking. Everyone else, I mean, I feel like I still kind of stood out like a sore thumb.
Are you the only guy from Woodstock in the group?
Well, no, Mark Kramer was in the band, but he didn't. He seemed to fit in aesthetically a little more than I did, I would say. And Stu Martin, I mean, he's just a world class. I mean, he's been the same for decades, and wherever you put him, he's going to be himself.
Right.
But my appeal to the band was knowing that Stu was playing drums, and I've been hearing great things about Bill Laswell on bass, and that's what got me going.
Right.
But yeah, as far as David Allen, it was this whole kind of European scene. Like he was an entourage of people. It wasn't just David. It was like he had his girlfriend and George Laton and his girlfriend from France were part of the managing or road managing. I don't know what their role was. And there were some other people and kids, and it's just it was a crowd of people. And really, when we went on the road, some of those people stayed at my little cabin in Woodstock. People just were part of the scene, and I can't remember their names. Might have been related to David somehow. I don't know. But yeah, I lived in a little cabin. There was only cold running water. There was an outhouse, and I paid $65 a month, and I had to cut the landlady's lawn. That was my deal. But it was down the street from Anthony Braxton, so I took a couple lessons with him, and I got to hang out with him because I was down the road from him, and I got to practice. That was like a great time for me because the rent was so low. Yeah. I didn't have money. I didn't have any real job, but I could stay there and practice. I pulled it off for like a number of years. It was pretty cool. Sometimes I wish I could do that again.
Let me pull up the picture of you guys on the bus, and we can talk about that a little bit. I'd like you to kind of identify everybody.
Yeah.
So that's David Allen.
Yep.
I assume this is Bill Laswell.
That's Bill smiling.
Incredibly young Bill Laswell.
Yeah. So he's got a
and
beard
yeah,
on.
not nearly as serious looking as the Bill Laswell we know today. And
Yeah.
I assume this is Beinhorn.
That's Michael
right?
Beinhorn. Yep.
Michael Beinhorn.
Who I've been in touch with just on the internet. We're not. It's not like we were ever friends or anything, but we stayed in touch a little bit. And of course, I watched his amazing career through the years, as well as Laswell's. And
Yeah. And the man.
And there's me
himself.
with a mustache and a necklace and wearing all white.
Yes. Well,
Honestly, I was studying Buddhism a lot back then, and I just I was doing different things. I was playing a lot of different things.
You kind of have that John McLaughlin look,
Yeah, yeah, that's it.
And so we got the leather contingent over here, and then on this side, who are these people?
That's Bill Bacon.
Okay, and he was a drummer. He was a drummer.
Yeah. He started out as the drummer with Mother Gong.
Oh, okay.
But when
is this a guy? Did he end up replacing Stu?
Yes, he did.
Okay.
And he ended up playing with with Bill and other bands like Curlew, and
right.
It was a big part of the scene for a while. And then to the left of him is Cliff.
Culturary.
Yeah, who's having serious illness right now, and he's got fundraisers going on and stuff. He's pretty sick.
So what was he playing in the band?
He was a guitar player, but he wasn't really playing in Gong. He was more like there for the zoo band part of it.
I see. And this guy?
And that's Fred Marr.
Oh yeah.
He was the drummer in zoo band. I don't think he played in Gong or Mother Gong, but sometimes people sat in or did stuff. And sometimes we'd have these great, I have to say right before I forget it, sometimes the best part of this tour, I thought, were the sound checks, because we'd actually get up there and jam and just make up pretty cool stuff.
Did any of that stuff get recorded?
Not that I know of, but I had a lot of fun with that. It was a little bit offshoot from what we were doing with David.
So I also noticed a lot of graffiti around the bus.
Yeah, that didn't take too long before people started writing stuff. It would be nice to have some close-ups of what people were writing. It was just kind of goofy stuff, really.
So were you eating and sleeping on this bus as well as traveling?
Some of the people, like if you look behind David, you see there's like a loft up there.
Yeah.
They built that in there, and that was pretty much commandeered by the zoo band folks. Martin Beasy was on this tour too. He's not in this picture, but Martin Beasy did the sound.
Oh. And
he eventually started his own studio where a lot of stuff was recorded. BC Sound over in Red Hook. So he was on this tour, but I don't recall him playing. He might have played a little bit. He was mostly doing sound and helping out with everything. Could be wrong about that, but he wasn't really a part of Zoo Band, but he was like the sound guy, part roadie type position. He was very young. I think he was younger than everybody.
Right.
All these guys were young. I mean, I was 24 maybe, and I might have been, except for David, I might have been older than the other guy. The other guy's about average, maybe 5 years younger than me.
Yeah, I think Beinhorn is like 17 or 18, isn't he?
Yeah.
But,
And really, the music was very cool. They were definitely, what they were doing, the Zoo Band was totally distinctively different from what David Allen was doing. And it was a good opportunity for them probably to get their chops together and play in front of people. And, they had that more, at the time, what would be more cutting edge modern sound going on.
So you left on this tour in around April, and you come back in June. How many cities did you hit?
I don't remember exactly. I saw somewhere. There's a list of every place we played. We went up to Hartford, we went up to Toronto and Montreal, came back to New York, then started heading out to like Cleveland, and then just headed west. I mean, it was the first time I'd driven across country. Harry Williamson, who was pretty much running the Mother Gong show with Jilly. He did most of the driving, I seem to recall. Maybe George Laton, the French guy. Yeah, I mean, I'm telling you, it was pretty funky, and it wasn't very comfortable, and it was a school bus. It was a yellow school bus that they bought in New York City. I don't know who bought it. I mean, Georgia was behind that, probably, and it was probably a low-budget deal. But, you know, it broke down a couple times going across country. I mean, there was this one time we're all out there pushing the bus. There was a time in L.A. where the bus totally broke down, and we had to get to Phoenix or someplace. And I remember Harry Williamson was under the bus almost all night long, fixing it. So yeah, the bus itself is a story in and of itself. It's just remarkable, really, that it actually worked most of the time and made the trip.
we see 7 people in this photo, but how many people were actually traveling on the bus?
Yeah, that's a good question, because there were different people who were in and out. Like George and his girlfriend Christine, they were on the bus part of the time. Georgia was on the bus part of the time, but I seem to remember they might have had another separate car, or maybe they were driving ahead. And Harry Williamson, and even Jilly, I don't even remember how much she was actually on the bus. She might have been in a separate vehicle. And the more I think about it, there had to have been another vehicle. But the people you're looking at right there were on the bus, I would say, most of the time. And to answer your question, I mean, we slept on the bus when you're driving, but I don't remember having to spend nights on the bus or anything like that. Everywhere we went, there was never a hotel, but it was always, wherever we played, there were certain people that would put us up. So they must have had advance notice of the band's coming into town, you know, who can take people. So we always were staying at the different people, fans or people following the band or people who put the show together. They would find people to put us up.
Well, probably David Allen had a lot of connections.
Yeah, I'm not even sure. I don't know who had the connections, honestly. But, you know, everywhere, every city, they knew who David Allen was. And here's the thing. It was a manifestival, right? The concept, manifestival. So it wasn't just us. Most of the time, if not every time, when we played, there'd be 1, 2, or 3 other bands, local bands for the most part. I remember Tin Huey was one of the bands. I can't think of there were like local bands that were pretty known locally, but also part of the new, they called it the new wave, the no wave, or whatever they wanted to call it. This festival would incorporate several bands, so it would be a whole big event. So between all those people, like I think that's where I met Chris Butler of the Waitresses, because he was in Tin Huey, and Ralph Carney was in Tin Huey.
Oh yeah, Ralph was.
Yeah,
I knew Ralph well. Everybody in the Bay Area knew Ralph.
Yeah, well, Ralph was at the Creative Music Studio as well for a while, and Ralph and I were in the Swollen Monkeys with Mars, and with Mars Williams, we started a saxophone trio called Sax to the Third Power. That was me and Ralph and Mars, and we did a couple shows in New York here and there, but we never made any recordings or anything. But yeah, they were all in the Cleveland area or the Kent area or Akron. So we played out there. We played in Kent, I think. So a couple years later, I started being part of, a lot of those people moved to New York. So like the Waitresses and Tin Huey guys, they were all living in New York too. And some of them gravitated to Woodstock, New York as well. So there was that's what I loved about it. There was this great merger of people. Like when you were in a band in New York, you weren't just in one band. You were in 4 or 5 bands, and like in the Swollen Monkeys, some of those people were in the B-52s, or the Waitresses, or Tin Huey, or any number of other bands. There's this crisscrossing or interaction of, I don't know what you call it. There's a better word. I'm not thinking of the term right now. Cross fertilization, maybe.
That's what it sounds like.
Yeah, and I still love that whole idea. That's why I like this conversation, because I still feel like that maybe, I'm sure it's happening nowadays too, of course, but I mean, that was an important thing for me. That was entertaining and enlightening for me, just seeing, oh, these guys, they have a band, but oh, that's the same bass player in that band. Like Laswell was playing with all kinds of bands. Everybody here was playing with lots of different bands. David had moved up to Woodstock, the area, a town called Willow, and he had his little home studio, and it might have been Mark Kramer doing the engineering on some of this. He was Mark Kramer and David Allen like really hooked up a lot more than others in the band. Over time, Mark did a lot more projects with David, and this was done in a home studio. And I play about 10 notes on this thing. Believe me, I don't do much on this at all, but nevertheless, so you see the picture of David. That's just very similar to the one in the bus. You know, he's wearing leather. He doesn't look like the Pixie Teapot crowd.
Right.
You know what I mean? He's taken on a whole new vibe, this New York.
Sure. So, but even if you didn't play that many notes on, you must have been there for the recording sessions, waiting to play your notes. Do you remember how?
I don't remember too much. It was a tiny room. It wasn't, it was like a home studio, and it wasn't a real studio. I just remember going over there, and at the time I was playing some electronic stuff. I had a Maestro unit connected to my saxophone, which was an early analog kind of way of doubling your sound or making your sound a little different, maybe an octave lower, things like that. And I know that's what I did on that album. And honestly, what happens with many albums, I'm sure I did other stuff, but it just they didn't use it. And then Gary Window played, he has actually a bigger role on this than I did. And I was friends with Gary, and Gary lived up in Woodstock as well. And he was playing with Carla Bley, and, Gary did a million things. If you ever want to do a whole separate episode, you could do a whole show on Gary Window.
Okay. I think we have. Yeah, here's the back of the album.
Yeah, don't ask me. I didn't. Honestly, I didn't know what the hell was going on back there. I don't know what David. I don't know where his head was at. There was this funny thing with he was anti-pot, anti-weed at the time. And this kind of takes us back to the tour. There would be some shows where people would show up to hear us, and they were tripping, or they were on mushrooms, or they're on something, because to them this is going to be like the pothead pixie European hippie scene, I guess, for lack of a better word. And David, sometimes he was adamant about he would actually say little things on stage about not smoking, and almost like he was anti-weed at the time. And that's not to say that everybody on the bus was that way, but David kind of was. And I remember when
David had probably consumed enough for the whole crowd by then,
Yeah, exactly. And I don't know how much of that was bullshit. Like maybe he was tripping the whole time. But I just don't. I just don't know. He was with his girlfriend a lot. I forget her name, but they were always hanging out, and she's still around.
So you do have a credit here on the back of the album.
Yeah, but I swear to God, I only play a few notes on that.
It looks like everybody on the bus is on this album.
You're right. You're right about that. I'm looking at that now. Everybody in that picture is on that album. So that's like the Material Band with Kramer and myself and Gary Window. And Gary was supposed to be on the tour with us, but I think he just bailed or didn't want it. And just like Stu Martin split because the money wasn't good. Back to the tour again. The money was bad, but it didn't faze me at all. I didn't care. I wasn't, I wasn't about the money. They paid me. I got enough. I wasn't expecting to make money. But if you were someone like Gary or Stu Martin, older people, and you have a track record, you're expecting this to be a little more professional, and it just wasn't.
The Zoo Band ends up recording in Woodstock. And there's a quote on the album that says, the music contained on this recording was conceived and executed between February and July of '79. So that means that some of this music was written on the road. If you guys were, April, May, June, you're touring. Do you remember these writing sessions?
Well, I wasn't part of any of that. I wasn't a member of Zoo Band or Material at all. I was just in the New York Gong and Mother Gong. But those guys had already had this certain material that they were performing. So I thought my guess is they already had a lot of that together. But yeah, maybe they came up with more. They probably solidified it as they were playing it live. Because up to that point, I don't think they'd done too many live gigs, maybe at Zoo Place and a couple other things. But when you're in a band, you're putting material together as you're going along, you find little nooks and crannies that make it more work better or tighter, or you subtract.
Well, you said you were doing these jams for sound checks and stuff. Do you think any writing material came out of that?
Boy, I have no idea. I can't say it did. I think the general concept of the sound, though. I know one thing, Bill Laswell and myself and a couple others, we were really into Ornette Coleman, the Primetime band, which started like Ornette's electric stuff and maybe Jamaluddin Takuma and a couple of the harmonic, so-called harmonic stuff. And that's what I loved. And that's where I felt really free. And we got into that area. I know that's what Bill liked. Like, he really liked the Electric Miles stuff.
Oh, yeah. I mean, he would go out and produce some of that later, the remix.
Yes. Yeah, and I was always surprised that Bill didn't get involved with producing or working with Ornette Coleman. There was a time when there was going to be a band put together. Roger Trilling, who was managing material or had some business role in that band. I don't know if it was management. He was going to he worked with Ornette. They wanted to put a band together called White House, and it was going to be Ornette's music, but without Ornette playing. And Laszlo was going to play bass. I was going to play sax, and I don't know who the other people were. There might have been material guys. I don't know. But for me, I was all excited because I loved Ornette, and I thought, oh, this is perfect. And Ornette was behind it, and they were going to call it White House. But it never came to be. If you talk with George Cartwright, he did go on to do something similar to that with Ornette. Like not playing with Ornette, but playing Ornette's music. It was just a concept that happened. But yeah, that as far as back to the Zoo Band and that recording, I lived pretty close to Levon Helms's house, which is where Eddie Offord had his studio.
Right. So that was going to be my next question. How does this Zoo Band end up in Woodstock to record an album? And it seems that Giorgio Gomelski, I know he had a connection with Eddie Offord back in the London days when Eddie Offord was like a brand new recording engineer at Advision Studio. So Gomelski knew Offord, but somehow Gomelski and Offord end up, in the New York area at about the same time. And I'm not exactly sure how Offord got there. It looks like he was working with David Sanchez.
Who was also lived up in Woodstock. Well, let me see if I can recall this. Eddie Offord I don't know if he was living there, but he had his whole studio at Levon's house, which was they call it the barn. And his studio was originally set up to do live shows. Like, he was one of the first guys that would go do like a major rock and roll live show and record it.
Yeah, he pioneered that with Yes.
Yeah, what they called remote recording or whatever they called it, out in the truck outside. So I don't know the Levon and Eddie Offord connection, but somehow all his equipment was there. And I had already done something there. I mean, I was in a band called the Mark Black Band in Woodstock. It was a Woodstock band. And Eddie came to hear us. He liked us, and that's how we met Eddie. And he offered us time, like free time at the studio.
Wow. How generous.
Yeah, I found this out later. I didn't know all the details. So we were recording back then they weren't records, they were demos. Everything we did was a demo back then. And Eddie offered
79, 1979 here.
Could have been 78 or 79. But I'm still confused as to whether Eddie engineered the stuff, because I think he did. But when I saw the record that came out of all these demos, and some of them were done at Carla Bley's studio and some were done at Levon's, Eddie Offord's place, Eddie isn't credited as being the engineer. And I think he did engineer a couple of things, but they didn't make it on the album, because I know Eddie was around. But the main thing is he liked us enough to give us time at the studio. And I don't know if Levon knew about this. I mean, one day when I was there, Levon came home. He was on the road, and I said hi to him. That was like, he seemed like, I don't know if he was a little wondering what was going on. Who are all these people at my house? But we were there recording, and we did.
Did Eddie Offord have a key to Levon Helm's studio? I suppose he.
Oh
would.
yeah. Well,
Yeah.
It was actually Eddie's studio.
Yeah.
I don't know what their arrangement it was, but that's why I sent you that picture of the RCO All Stars record.
Right.
And I had no involvement with that whatsoever, but that was done. A good part of that was done there.
Right, and Eddie Offord's the engineer on that, right?
Yes, and I don't know what RCO stands for. I forget, but there was a RCO. It's affiliated with another company out in California. But Eddie was a kind of a character, and I was even going through one of my old calendar books. I saved my old calendar books, thinking someday I want to know where I was on a certain day. And I saw this note and said, "Call Eddie Offord," and I'm thinking, I don't remember what it was about. But we played badminton together once, and he was like this. I thought of him as a very childish, kind of like goofy kid, you know.
Really?
But he was this brilliant engineer.
He was playful.
And, yes, I would say that. And the studio was an open concept. The thing about him is he didn't want to be behind a booth. He liked the idea. Like his console was right there in the studio. So when we did that material recording, and again, I have to emphasize, I had such a small involvement with this. Bill called me up to play on one song, White Man, and there are only 4 songs on the record.
And you were saying you lived right near the studio at that time.
I did. I had Anthony Braxton lived down one side of the road, and about 2 miles on another road was Levon's place.
But you'd already worked with these guys, so they knew what they were getting.
Oh yeah, and I think Bill liked my playing at the time, and I liked how it worked out. But if you just want a little more information, all I can say is Eddie had his studio there. I think it was a 24-track console, and he had these little joysticks on each track. So today that it's a knob, but he had like a joystick so you could do the circular motion with it. I know little about this stuff, but I thought it might have been one of his innovations. At the time, I thought it was, but I don't know. I don't know if you know anything about that, but that was interesting. I thought that was of interest. And then when I was recording my part, just doing this, soloing over this tune, Eddie was engineering, which Giorgio was right out, like almost, I don't want to say humping me, but he was like physically like egging me on, like
while you're playing.
Yeah.
But he's doing this silently.
Yeah, he's kind of like, I see, unless I'm losing my mind, I always remembered that because no one had ever done that before. I have a friend who was playing with Warren Bernhardt, who lived in Woodstock, a piano player, and he said that James Brown did the same thing with him. He was doing some clavinet stuff on a James Brown record, and he said James Brown would come out and dance in front of him to get, while he was playing.
Well, did you see Gomelski do this with other players in that session?
No, but I wasn't around for the other stuff,
Oh, I see. You were just overdubbing?
No, we recorded it live.
Oh, okay.
They did do some overdubbing on the record, but the gist of it was done live. And it was pretty exciting. It was great, I hadn't done that many recordings. I mean, that was fun. I love recording, and that was a great opportunity for me just to do any kind of recording.
Sure.
And I was glad it came out as a record. I was pretty excited to be on a record, you know.
Material is basically a three-piece, and they're starting to play around New York, the New York area, as a three-piece with guests that are fronting. They would have different guests come in to front the band.
Yeah.
A list of guests that I have here is pretty amazing. The names that now, if you're familiar, with Laswell's work, you know these people: Sonny Sharrock, Fred Frith,
Yeah.
Henry Threadgill. Did you see any of those gigs?
I'm trying to remember. I probably did. I can't recall a specific one. But like Sonny Sharrock, believe it or not, I mean, he had played with Herbie Mann.
Uh-huh.
So he was on, there was like two sides of him. He played like that Herbie Mann kind of music.
Uh-huh.
Kind of almost like Brazilian jazz, West Coast kind of jazzy stuff. And then he would do like his complete wild stuff with Miles Davis or his own groups. But yeah, that was one thing that Laswell was really brilliant at doing, was getting these combinations of people together. Uh-huh. And eventually, I mean, one of the last conversations I ever had with Bill, which is quite a long time ago, he was saying, "Oh, I'm using some of the creative music studio guys, like the world music guys, like Aib Diang. You familiar with him? African percussionist. Anyways, I thought that was interesting. He could pull in these different people. Yeah, those people you mentioned. Nicky Skopelidis was a guitar player.
Oh yeah,
that played with Material, and I did see them once. I don't know whatever happened with Nicky, but he was adding some fantastic parts to it.
Yeah, I love his work. The albums I have.
Yeah, and then he went on to play with, I think, with Curlew. So if you ever get to talk with George Cartwright, or and George was part of that Gong and Material going over to Europe, and I don't honestly don't know what happened over there. I don't really know much about it. I was just pissed that I wasn't asked to go, honestly, but then I did something else with Carl.
Yeah.
That was sort of like that wasn't the first album, but it was reissued on the compilation, thus called compilation. The guy who took that photo, I'm embarrassed, I can't remember his name right now. I'm sure he's credited on the record. I'm pretty sure. I have one of his photos at home. He did a lot of the photography of the downtown scene stuff back then.
Here's the credits.
This
is like two. There are like two EPs on this to make up the album, and it looked like half of this were the Gomelski sessions done at Woodstock, and the other half were sessions produced by Material and Martin Vesey.
Yeah, you can see Rob Davis. His name is on there as well. He was another Woodstock recording engineer person. Yeah, that was the first record, the EP. I think it was on Red Records.
It was on, actually, it was released more than once with this cover on two different labels that I saw on Discogs. I'm not sure if it was Celluloid or Charlie, one of them.
I think. Yeah, Celluloid, and I think it was Red Records and Charlie and Celluloid. Eventually, I think they all became Celluloid.
So here, this is the original credit.
Yeah.
And special thanks to Don Davis. Apart from the New York scene itself, the one thing that comes to my mind that came out of this tour, the forming of this band, and these early records, is we get these soon to be fantastic producers. Of course, Bill Laswell goes on to do some amazing production work, and Mike Beinhorn does some incredible things. And then Kramer, of course, he went on to do his own studio and production.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I had no idea Michael Beinhorn would go on to do what he did. I mean, he would admit it himself. He was kind of a punky kid back then, you know, and real attitude and stuff. And if you read his stories about him getting started with the Red Hot Chili Peppers and stuff, he just took off from there. And of course, they did that record Rocket, which took them, you know, it really changed the story for them, right? Like overnight, that everything changed for them.
Right. And then, you know, things get complicated too, because there's all these falling outs that happen between people. I mean, Giorgio Gomelski and Bill Laswell seem to have a falling out, like right at this very time, you know, right after they record this first EP, it seems. And
yeah, I don't have much insight into that. Only that I knew, you know, people were having problems. I wasn't involved with the business aspect of it, and I didn't feel like I had any problems with anyone. But I wasn't invested in any of it, you know.
Right.
I was just like going along for the ride, and you know, want me to play? Yeah, I'd love to play, but I didn't have any deals with anybody. No one was really cared about that. I didn't have anything to present in that way. Right. But yeah, there was definitely some vibes. I mean, Giorgio was quite a character, energetic guy. I always loved his accent, and for me, opened up a lot of eyes to me. Like just meeting someone of such a burly kind of his personality was just kind of extreme. I mean. I didn't know what to make of them. There are other people around that time too. I think of Bernardo Palumbo, started El Telier, the Latino American Center. He was from Argentina, and he had his own scene happening with world music. So you know, Giorgio was one, Bernardo was another, and then Hilly, of course, at CBGB's was another. They were all sort of part of the downtown scene that got connected with the Knitting Factory, and all the clubs were happening back there, like the Mud Club, Danceteria, the Ritz. I wrote a couple down here just so I could remember. The Ritz, Mud Club, Inroads was a place where these bands played, like maybe Material might play, TR3, Roulette, and then I guess the Knitting Factory became the most renowned one for this music. Right.
Yeah, that was the one that got my attention on the West Coast. And when I tried to do a West Coast type of Knitting Factory thing, and I started booking a weekly series of improvised music.
Oh, really?
And that's a different story. And I do have a blog post about that one, but I'm going through archival material from that stuff too, and it's a wonderful trip down memory lane.
Yeah, I want to slip in something that we didn't talk about, but it goes back to the Creative Music Studio, and that was. Are you familiar with the CETA program? CETA. No. It was originally started. It was a government program started by Richard Nixon, but Jimmy Carter was the guy who really took it to a different level. And we in New York City, as well as Woodstock, and at the Creative Music Studio, we had, it was a grant you could apply for, the CETA program, Comprehensive Employment Training Act, and we had about 23, I don't know, 18 or 20 something people on the CETA program, including myself. And we were getting paid by the government full time with medical, full benefits to play music.
Wow.
And we were playing in hospitals and prisons, and we got paid to stay home and practice and rehearse. And there were a few bands that came out of that. So that was a big thing.
When did that end?
It ended when Ronald Reagan took over. It's almost as clean cut as that. And the Creative Music Studio pretty much was floated for a couple years on the CETA grant. They even had positions for grant writers and administrative people were on a CETA program. It was pretty interesting. And the town of Woodstock had their own. I was in three different ones. One was called the Creative Education Center, the Creative Education Center. We had CETA grants. I was on that, teaching music, teaching flute. I was on the Woodstock, I forget what it was called, but it was working, like doing physical work, like painting buildings and construction, like refinishing some furniture and stuff like that. And then I eventually transferred to the Creative Music Studio program, and I was on that. And I ran that right till it stopped, and was able to collect unemployment, and that's when I moved to New York City. So when I moved to New York City from Woodstock, I was on unemployment as a buffer from the CETA program. So one of these social programs that they would never get anywhere.
You're telling me we can thank Richard Nixon and Jimmy Carter for the New York downtown music scene?
I think there were a lot of musicians that were being supported by that. And in New York City, they had a thing called the Music Mobile.
Uh-huh.
And there were some very hip musicians that were getting CETA grants to present music in various settings throughout the city.
Uh-huh.
That's worthy of a whole other exploration. Now, I looked into it. I always thought it was Jimmy Carter's program, but it was actually, in fact, started by Richard Nixon, of all people.
Sure. Yeah.
But the way Jimmy Carter started asking for more funding, and it was getting more arts and education oriented, you know, today they would have called that, you know, some kind of socialist thing. And
yeah, right.
It would be laughed at now, but at the time, it saved my ass, you know. And I'm still doing the same thing. I'm working on finished. I don't know. I'm an antique restorer, and I work on furniture, and I play music. So I'm still doing the things I was trained for on the CETA program.
Great. Well, that brings up my final question for you. And first of all, thanks a lot for spending time with me, Don. I love hearing your stories. I love learning how this music was created. But what is Don Davis doing music-wise today?
Okay, yeah, I'm still going at it. Right now, I'm playing with a very young piano player. She just turned 18, and her name is Veronica Lewis. And she's like she sings, writes songs, and plays like, you know, R&B, boogie woogie kind of piano. And we, during the COVID period, I started playing with her. She was 15, and then we went into the studio, started recording, and then COVID hit. But we never really officially finished our recording, but we decided to piece it together, what we had done, and release it during COVID. And lo and behold, she has like a hit song on there called You Ain't Unlucky. And suddenly she's winning all these awards and getting listed in all the magazines and interviews. Their records getting played all over the place. So we've been touring. We've been doing some gigs with her. And if it weren't for COVID, we would have been probably doing this a year ago. But everything got delayed, and it still is delayed, honestly. I just played at. I was just down in Pennsylvania playing at a big festival down there in Lancaster. This week, I'm going down to Delaware and Maryland to play with her at a couple gigs. So that's a lot of fun, and I play all tenor sax, and I just get to wail, and it's just a trio. And so that's one thing I'm doing. I'm going back to Woodstock in a couple weeks to play with my old band, the Mark Black Band, which is Woodstock.
So you sent me your SoundCloud link. And I listened to a lot of that, and there was some great stuff. There was there was this kind of blues-based band that was a couple of the songs were really kind of blasting it out.
Yeah, check. I mean, my SoundCloud is pretty much a variety of a lot of different things. So yeah. One of those bands was called Rooster. That was a Boston-based blues band.
Yeah, I think that was the one, yeah.
Yeah, you might be thinking of that one. The Mark Black Band wasn't a blues band per se. And also right now I'm in a band, it's like a 1920s, 30s jazz band called Clyde Bisbee and the Wheelhouse Revelers. And we do a lot of like Fats Waller stuff and really early jazz music and a lot of original things. But again, we're not doing much, and COVID really put a stop to everything. We had the ball rolling, and we haven't really gotten it rolling again.
Yeah, well, it's it's starting to pick up. Almost all the clubs in the San Francisco area are now doing regular shows. I don't think the attendance is, back yet because people are still a little reluctant. The younger people, I think, are starting to do this more. My local venue that I love to go to, Winter's Tavern, they're back up to doing 3-4 shows a week, and the people are starting to go back to shows a little bit more, and hopefully the COVID will not get too bad this winter. And if we can get through the winter, then it should be hopefully pretty much over.
Yeah, it does vary from state to state. Like with Veronica, we just played in New York State at Daryl's house, which is a great place, but we couldn't get many people in there. People were still reluctant to go out, I think, and it was an off night. But then we just played in Portsmouth at a new jazz blues club called Jimmy's, and we sold out. So it's really, you could play somewhere. Often we're an opening band, so we had the benefit of opening for one of the blues people. She's kind of on a blues American roots kind of circuit. But yeah, you're right. Like you might, where you are, like you just said, is doing okay. I hear some places there's no problem at all, and other places it's still people are reluctant to go out at all. I mean, now that it's indoors, when it was outdoors, like even our band with Veronica, we were only going to do outdoor things, not indoor things. That was their decision. They made that call, and because of that, they turned down a lot of gigs.
Yeah,
and even bands I know that tour, they say, yeah, we think we got this tour, but we don't know what's going to get canceled and what's, And if the ticket sales aren't good, they'll cancel you, or they'll say, hey, we don't want the opening band. So we're still affected by that.
Don, this has been a great conversation. I want to get some links from you that I can share with people for the stuff you're doing. And I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording now before we say goodbye, because I want to make sure that it saves this. Okay.
Yeah, my battery's getting low too, and I didn't bring my charging cord. So.
All right.